In our news bulletin for this evening, centenary commemorations marked another milestone in Niue's history in recognition of the 150 Niuean men who went to World War I. Awasele Ononipata paid tribute to their soldiers during their annual village show day on Saturday. Yesterday marked the 100th year since 150 Niueans left our shores for the war in Europe. Those 100 years may have dimmed the memories of the descendants of those 150 Niueans, but the thoughts of those who went to war still resonates with us today. The courage and endurance of those who did their duty at Gallipoli remained a vivid memory and source of identity, belonging and pride not only for those descendants, but for every Niuean. Preparations spearheaded by the Niue Returned Servicemen's Association, who had the autonomy to make sure the commemoration is something to treasure for years to come for the families of those who went to war and for Niue, a small Pacific nation who had no hesitation to the call to arms from New Zealand. The arrival of 2 planes from New Zealand, a regular weekly Air New Zealand flight, brought in a group from the Tamaki Ekalise Niue Church in Glen Innes, plus other family members who arrived for the most important day of Niue. The Hercules from the New Zealand Defence Force arrived earlier in the morning with the Foreign Minister, Honourable Murray McCully, on board, along with a former Cabinet Minister of the National Party, Sir Don McKinnon. Also aboard the Hercules were about 30 Niueans who worked in various peacekeeping roles, courtesy of the New Zealand government. The commemoration church service, conducted by the Vice President of the Ekalise Niue, Reverend Vili Kampala Viviani, started at 3 in the afternoon. It was to accommodate the departure time of the 150 Niueans all those years ago. The church service, about a couple of hundred people, including those who were sitting outside, the hour-long service, conducted in English and Niuean, tells us of how Niue as a nation contributed far beyond its means and how much it means to the world peace. The most interesting part of the service, other than the prayers and a sermon, was the moving tribute and narrative about the 150 who endured hardships on the way to war fronts in Europe, of how much they missed their families and how they encountered conditions far more different to their tropical homeland of Niue. After the church services, the 2 plaques dedicated to the memory of the 150 soldiers and to commemorate 100 years since they left on the MV Apanui to Europe were unveiled, witnessed by a lot more people than those who were in the church. After the service, a separate program for the unveiling of the cenotaph that was gifted by New Zealand was held near Tomb Point. As the invited guests gathered towards the second part of the program, a marching parade filled the main road. The parade was featured with the Police and Defence Force contingent from New Zealand and the local Ekalise Niue Boys and Girls Brigade. Before officially unveiling the storyboard and cenotaph, Honourable McCully stated that the storyboard and cenotaph is in tribute to Niue's 150 brave men and their efforts in the war. So that's the story of the relationship between New Zealand and Niue is well known to visitors. The combined contingent of Defence Force from New Zealand proudly performed the renowned Maori traditional war dance known as the haka after Honourable Don McKinnon and His Excellency Ross Ardern unveiled the storyboard, whilst Honourable Murray McCully and Honourable Premier Takitalangi unveiled the cenotaph. The formalities continued as officials made their way to the National War Memorial grounds at the Millennium Hall. They were met by a takalo challenge before the procession that included the New Zealand Police and Defence Force personnel, together with the Girls and Boys Brigade, continued their march past to the area for the unveiling of the plaque prepared by the Niue Returned Servicemen's Association. The decision to host a program at the National War Memorial site was appropriate, as it is said that this was where the soldiers left Niue 100 years ago, on an afternoon perhaps just like this. The significance of this commemoration was re-emphasized by representatives who were given the opportunity to speak.
Commemorations of the centenary of the First World War began in 2014 and will continue to 2018. During this period, the New Zealand Defence Force is working hard to honour the memory of all those ordinary men and women who did extraordinary things in the service of their countries. What those 150 Niuean men, with the support of their whānau, did can only be described as extraordinary. To travel so far from their homes and families to such unfamiliar places and conditions is remarkable. It is fitting that we are here today to dedicate 2 new memorials in their memory to help keep their story alive. They are not forgotten in New Zealand either. I am pleased that the names of the 3 additional Niuean soldiers who died as a result of their First World War service, as announced by our Minister earlier this afternoon, will soon be added to the Roll of Honour housed at the National War Memorial in New Zealand.
When I was growing up, knew nothing about our contribution in the war. So it's appropriate 100 years later. Could have been earlier, 100 years later, that we learn the history of these men. The challenge for you now, the families, the challenge for the families now is to look for that information that Margaret has, and look for that information of their ancestors who went to war. And I think you will find it very interesting and have a better understanding of what they were.
The memorial cenotaph was opened by Honourable Premier Toke Talangi and Niue RSA President Charlie Tauvaka. Former Premier and war veteran Sani Lakatani read out the commemoration dedication.
Lest we forget the last breath of those who never made it back, for their last moment also longed for home. May their legacy and memories be our living treasures. As we commemorate and celebrate the centenary of our World War I effort today, may we always remember the sacrifice made so we may continue our journey to the present and for peaceful and much kinder world.
The flags of Niue, New Zealand and Great Britain were hoisted by members of the Girls and Boys Brigade before observing a moment of silence. As the island and families spent time to remember and reflect on the sacrifice made by those 150 men many years ago, they were able to lay wreaths. Despite the sadness of such an occasion, it was also a time to celebrate the lives of those soldiers. A large feast or dinner was hosted at the Niue High School multipurpose hall that was packed to full capacity, and even more people were seated in tents outside. There was a great number of Niueans who had travelled from New Zealand and Australia to pay their respects and be part of this historical occasion. Celebrations continued well into the night with lively songs and dances from the combined group of the Niue RSA, Hakupu Youth, Avasele Youth and groups of Niueans living in New Zealand. The 100 years commemoration marks yet another milestone in the special relationship shared between New Zealand and Niue. This was a sentiment shared by Foreign Affairs Minister Honourable Murray Makali earlier today.
It's been a terrific experience in terms of the relationship between the two countries. The Premier made the point yesterday that when he was young, not many Niuean kids were told about the experience of Niue's contribution to World War I. You can double that in relation to New Zealand. And today, still far too few people know about the contribution and the strength of the ties that go back that 100 years. So having the New Zealand news media here with me, able to see the strength of the celebrations, to understand the importance of our long-standing ties, that's been a wonderful opportunity for the relationship.
Niue receives a substantial amount of aid money from New Zealand, and you've had the opportunity to visit a few of the investment sites. What are your views on how the developments at the new school are going?
Well, the new school looks terrific. Looks great value for money, and I was very pleased to see that. I'm thrilled with the development of the tourism industry here. This is the best story I've seen anywhere in the world in terms of investing development cash and getting a return. The Premier and I took a bold step together back in 2009. I think there would have been plenty of critics lining up to hang both of us if things hadn't worked out. But we've seen 100% growth in the tourism numbers, 100% growth in the GDP figures as a consequence. And I think that the step we've taken today of commencing the construction of another 20 rooms and the small conference facility will just keep that momentum rolling forward. So I'm thrilled with the partnership we have. I congratulate the Premier and his government on the leadership that they've shown, and the results speak strongly for themselves.
Apart from tourism, one of our main exports is nonu, and you also visited the nonu farm. What potential is there for any partnership or investment in that venture?
Well, we weren't really asked to consider partnership on the nonu project, although I did get an update on the figures there. But we were also briefed on the water project there. And that seems to be a very exciting opportunity. Lots of high quality water in a world where there's a good market for branded water of good quality. So we'll be fascinated to see how that develops, and we've not been asked for any engagement in that project yet, but it may be that none is required. We also very conscious of the fact that the growth that's happening in tourism is having a spin-off effect right throughout the private sector here, and to sit down with private sector leaders who are talking about all of the problems of growth is a wonderful experience.
All New Zealand officials and delegations departed the island today on a New Zealand Defence Force Hercules, and Niue stands proud of its 150 men who left its shores for a war that was not their own in a land unknown to them. It is hoped that their legacy and memory will live on for many years to come. Lest we forget, we will remember them. Leola was buzzing with activity on Saturday as the village of Avasele Onionepata pulled it together for their village show day. A few early birds were there at 6 in the morning to get the best of what was on sale, and as the day progressed, the crowds got bigger. This year, the women's displays were not judged, but most of the creative pieces were already pre-sold. What was also apparent was the abundance of agricultural products, much to the credit of the residents who have tended to their plantations despite the lack of rain and dry conditions. During the formal speeches, the village council representative mentioned that perhaps this may be the final show day at the Leolo school grounds, with the government's plans to develop the area as accommodation. The village boys brigade performed a short dramatized guard of honor to highlight the 12 Avasele men who signed up as soldiers for the First World War. It was a fitting reminder to the upcoming generations to recognize the sacrifice made by those ancestors and its effects on Niue today. The Avasele community from New Zealand also made a special trip for the show day and some of the pending celebrations and commemorations. They opened the entertainment for the day with songs and dances. The day concluded with cultural sports such as sika throwing and coconut bowling, yet another successful show day from the community of Avasele. That concludes our news bulletin for this evening. We do hope you can join us for our next news bulletin tomorrow.